Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. It's the first time in nearly 2 months that I've got the urge to do some batch sewing. So that's what we're doing today. Now, last year sometime I did a video on a combination of vinyl and normal upholstery fabric. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to show you how I go about batch sewing these vinyl upholstery bags using these samples as well as some of these samples and these ones as well. I've just gone into my fabric stash room and just pulled some bits out. I've got to get these vinyl bags made because my website's been inundated with orders and I ran out of stock. So I've got to get some more things made up and I might as well do a video. You guys can come and watch. So what I'm going to do is make all of these bags up, show you the processes that I go through to make these bags, and I'll also include what I do to get things listed on my website as well. So let's get to it. The first thing we need to do is remove the adhesive paper from the back of these swatch samples. I've had the heat press for about 2 years now, and it's been by far the best method as far as time management's concerned that I've used for removing the paper. It's not always successful though. I have tried washing, soaking and even IPA, the isopropyl alcohol, but this seems to be the best option for me. Once I've removed the adhesive that keeps the samples together, I've got to remove the rest of the paper from the back of those samples. With this lot, it's actually quicker just to pull it all off. You'll notice that there's a plastic coating on the outside edges. Most of it's too difficult to remove, so to save time, I'll just leave it there. It's really thin and won't add excess bulk to the sewing process later. The vinyl, on the other hand, is a little different. It's got a plastic coating on the back, and I also don't want to ruin it all by using the heat press. It's also quicker to remove the samples with a craft knife than trying to open up the sample board. There's way too many staple holes in the vinyl underneath to make it usable. I'll salvage the hangers though. These pull apart fairly easily, and the only problem I have left is the colour tags that have been stapled to the vinyl. I'll gently remove the staples so that there's less chance of the holes being visible when the bags are finished. When I list these on my website, I do mention that there's staple holes in the vinyl and that it adds to the charm of the product being made from rescued fabric. There's no need to remove the paper from the top or bottom of the samples because I'll do that when I'm squaring everything up later. The fabric samples go back under the heat press to remove some of the creases left where the fold lines are. I don't make any attempt to press the folds in the vinyl as I haven't had much success with that. It tends to separate from the backing fabric that's on there. I also always use Teflon sheets above and below the fabric layers. This way it protects the fabric and the hot plate. The mat underneath has lots of sticky residue from previous pour attempts. Now it's time to sort the samples. Each bag I plan on making will have 2 vinyl pieces and probably just 1 fabric sample that I'll cut in half later. I'll try to match up the vinyl colours, but sometimes you just can't. Quite often though, the mismatched pieces work really well together. Once I've paired up the vinyl pieces, it's time to select the fabric pieces that will go with it. But sometimes there's just no matching these up either. Again, I'll just do the best I can without having to pull apart another sample board. I have a lot of sample pieces left, but they'll get used up in other projects as well as those unlined zippered pouches I made ages ago. Once I've finished sorting the fabric, I'll check that I'm happy with the colourways and change anything that doesn't look right. It's at this point I need to make sure that I keep all bag pieces together. So when I cut the linings, they'll also be kept with each bag. I'm clipping the edges of the vinyl to one side of the fabric and then clipping the other vinyl piece to the other side. This way I know that these are all for the same bag when it comes time to sew it all up. So I'm matching up the longest side of the fabric pieces with the edge of the vinyl. That way the bags I make will be wider rather than tall and narrow, and I've just roughly lined it up inside the usable areas of the vinyl. Once I get over to the machine, it's really easy to assemble all of the pieces as I've got everything grouped together. I've got my vinyl or Teflon foot attached, and this helps me sew over the plastic more easily, otherwise the layers drag and stretch. For most of these projects, I use a regular number 90 or size 14 universal sewing machine needle, and my stitch length is often about 3 millimeters. I'll be top stitching soon, so I don't need a short stitch length. So to get the best use out of my time, I'll stitch both vinyl pieces to the fabric samples for all bag sets before I start the top stitching. After all of that's been stitched together, it's time to top stitch. I've increased my stitch length to about 4.5, but that varies from project to project, and sometimes I even forget. Throughout the entire project, I'm also using the same coloured thread. Mostly I'll use a grey that has a purplish tinge to it, but I don't really worry too much about the thread colour that I'm using. I often let the fabric dictate the direction of the top stitching, and in this case the seam is under the fabric due to the bulk of the vinyl, which is better as the top stitching thread is less visible on the textured fabric. Now that the layers are all together for the outer bags, everything needs to be squared up and the excess bits removed. When lining up the fabric for cutting, I'm using the straight edge of the stitching lines instead of the outer edge of the fabric or the vinyl. It'll give me a neater finish. Place my lining pieces underneath the outer bag fabric and cut it out to the same size. I do it this way because not all of my sample pieces are finished to the same size, and again this saves me more time. I don't worry too much about which linings I use. As you can see, I go through a few different colours, and all the offcuts go into a drawer or bag to use in other projects. I'll also be having my bag openings on the side seam instead of the bottom of the bags. That's why the lining and outer pieces are the same size. So you can see how easy it is to start creating bags without measuring a thing. I haven't had to measure anything yet. Now that I have all the linings cut out, it's time to separate the pieces for the back and front of my bags. I want the vinyl on each side to be on opposite sides. So on one side the vinyl will be at the top, and on the other side the vinyl will be at the bottom. So I need to cut the fabric in half. This is where I finally do some measuring. It's important from here that my back and front pieces are all the same size. And I'm also making sure that the lining stays with each bag set as well. So I've measured the centre of the fabric, cut it in half, and because the lining is right underneath, I'm cutting that at the same time. This is where I have actually made a slight mistake though, and I'll explain that to you later. What I should have done here is actually folded the fabric in half and had the vinyl and the upholstery fabric pieces cut to the same size. You'll see why later. Before I do anything else, I have to add my labels. So I take all the sets over to the machine, sew the label in place, and then put each completed front back with its corresponding set so I don't get them mixed up. Sometimes if I'm lucky, the labels cover up those staple holes I mentioned before. Once the labels are done, it's time to measure up for the zips. So I'm measuring 1 inch in from the edges, which is where the zip will end. Then I can measure up how much zipper tape I need for each bag. Once I know the size I need, I'll mark and measure all the tape before cutting it up. The size is usually pretty even across all the bags because the swatch samples were all the same length, but sometimes I do get it wrong and have to unpick and trim an edge. I've cut one long strip at about 3 inches and then folded it in half, which should give me plenty of fabric to overhang on the sides of my bags. Now I'm not going into detail about the folding of these as I've done that in other videos. So if you are interested, I'll try to remember to put a video link for one that shows this in more detail. These are kind of false tabs where I'm just inserting the ends of the zipper tape between the layers and clipping them all in place. You won't see any of the raw edges once the bags are finished. Then it's just a matter of stitching the fabric to each side of the zips in one go. I just use about 1/4 of an inch seam, and once I've done one side, I'll do the other. Now I can quickly cut the zips apart and hope that I haven't forgotten to put those sliders on. You can also do this project with regular zips. These are just more convenient to use. And here comes my double-sided tape. Next to my seam ripper, this has got to be one of the most useful tools I have in my sewing room. It's so much quicker to use than it is to pin or clip your fabric. Though having said that, you want to make sure that you only use wash-away tape. If it doesn't dissolve in water, it'll gum up your needles and you'll get sticky residue on your stitch plate and bobbin case. If you're in Australia, I do have this and black zips on my website. I'll put a link in the description. Can you hear those birds screeching in the background? They're so annoying. So I place the tape down and then the completed zip, and then another piece of tape followed by the lining fabric. I'm still keeping all the sets together too, so at this stage we're just doing one side of each bag. I had one strip of vinyl left over from all of those samples, so I'm quickly preparing another smaller bag. I have a nice narrow foot for installing the zips, so I've put that on, and I'll stitch all the zips in place, making sure that the outer bag fabric is at the top. Even though I've used a double-sided tape, I find it shifts less when the sturdier fabric is at the top. Stitch lengths back to 3mm. I have to put the vinyl foot back on for the top stitching, which has been increased back up to 4.5mm, and I'm still using the same thread colour as well. Now, I'm often asked questions not relating to anything in particular, so I was thinking I might do a Q&A video. So if you like that idea and you have any questions at all, put them in the comments. I might even put a post up in our Facebook group and see if there's questions there too. If there's enough interest, I'll do a video. Now, you know I'm testing you all to see how far you've gotten into this video. So one side's done and I have to do exactly the same for the other side of the bag. More double-sided tape putting the zips in place again, followed by the linings. And this is the last time I have to make sure I've kept all my sets together because everything is now attached. Then I've got to sew it all in place again and do the top stitching. With all this chopping and changing, I'll often forget to adjust my stitch length. And I might just show you a couple of bags here, as this is exactly the same process as we did before. Now that all the layers are together, I'll line up the top edges of each bag, and then I've realised I haven't checked my zips. I have a terrible habit of forgetting to leave an opening at the top, so the first thing I have to do is open all of my zips at least part of the way. Then I'll separate the linings from the outer fabric and clip the top edges together. I don't bother with the side seams or the bottoms, it's quicker this way and I can line everything up at the machine. Once I'm back at the machine, I always start sewing at the top of the bags and start with the outer fabric first. I almost always double stitch my outer fabric as well. The reason I do this is that I just use a regular Gutermann sew-all thread most of the time, instead of having to buy that thicker thread and then having to have lots of different colours. This is just easier and it's a cheaper way for me as well. Now it's time to trim the corners. Cut off any excess tabs on the sides of the bags. Of course, you only need to trim the corners if you're making flat pouches. I realised after turning the bags the right way out that I actually wanted tiny box corners, so this was a waste of time. Thankfully, I'd only turned out one bag. But I did waste my time trimming all those corners. So I've measured and marked the sizing of the box corners for the first bag just to show you what I'm actually doing. But I do prefer to do this at the machine. I'll use one of the markings I have on my stitch plate and sew all the box corners to the same size rather than having to clip all of the edges together. And now I can trim off all the corners instead of what I did earlier. Turn all the bags the right way out, and I'll leave the linings sticking out so that I can stitch them closed next. And then one of the last things I have to do is close up all of these linings. After that, I've got to trim off all the loose threads that I've missed and tidy up the bags. The very last thing I need to do to finish off these bags is to put the zipper pulls on. They just make it a little bit easier for the user to open and close their bags. And then finally, after several days holed up in my sewing room, these bags are finished. To get them onto my website, I'll find a spot outside to take photos of each bag. For these ones, I need to take pictures of the front and the back because the vinyl are different colours. And I've also got to photograph the side seams as they're not lined up properly. I'm going to say that I did this intentionally, but I actually forgot to take this into account when I cut the fabric, which is what I was referring to earlier. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. And lastly, here's a look at the fernery Chris and I built. Well, there we have it. They're all done. I ended up completing 12 bags, one of which has only one piece of vinyl on it because there was an odd piece of vinyl left over, and I thought I'd make this cute little pouch up as well. So it's got one piece of vinyl which is folded at the bottom, and then there's one piece of upholstery fabric on the top which was folded in half. Well, actually no, it wasn't. It was cut in half just like these ones were. So 12 bags all up. Before I let you know how much I'm going to charge them out at, when I have these in the shop, I usually fill them up with bubble wrap so that they sit nicely on the shelves. But you've got the blues, the green and the yellow and the green. As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to put matching colours together because they do actually work. Well, green and gold always go together. They're my two favourite colours. But even with the brown on there, I think that ties in nicely. So we've got the olive with a grey, a brown or a fawn and a lighter brown, a purple and cream, another brown, a charcoal with a grey on the back, that green and the red. The red's a nice vinyl as well. And I went out in the back room at the shop the other day and I found a really nice big piece of blue vinyl. So I'm going to be able to use up lots more swatch samples and to just use a blue vinyl on the back and front to make these bags. So how long did it take me? Quite a while. It took me 6 hours and 20 minutes to complete 12 bags. And I'll go through my costings as well. So I've got labels, a dozen of those, and that worked out at $3 for all 12. Now, when I purchase my products, I usually purchase at wholesale prices. Labels I buy at the same price that most other people do, but I always buy them in bulk. So I'll buy like 1,500 or 3,000 labels at a time because I do use them all. So labels, I spent a total of $3, or I'm charging out $3 for all of the labels that I've used. There are the zipper pulls, or these little tabs on the top, 12 of those, and I'm pricing that out at $1.80. So it would have only cost me about 90 cents for 12 of them. Again, I buy those in bulk as well. And I do have an Amazon link down in the description below where I can, where you can go and have a look at these zipper pulls. You can get them in lots of different colours. So if I'm using different coloured zips, I'll try and match up the tabs. For the zips and the sliders, I buy those in bulk from my wholesale supplier, and I also have them on my website, so I sell them retail as well. When I price these out for my products, I charge them out at retail price, not at wholesale price. So even if I were to go to our local Spotlight store and I spent $1 on the zips, I would charge that out at $2. I always double everything that I actually spend my money on, or I always double the cost of what I spend. Fabric, I haven't charged for because I get all of my fabric for free, or almost all of my fabric for free, and this helps me keep my prices a little bit lower than what I would normally keep them at if I had to purchase the material myself. So these would be a lot more expensive had I had to purchase the fabric. But had I had to purchase the fabric, we wouldn't have little staple holes in them either. They'd be much better quality fabric pieces. But I think you can barely even notice that, and you certainly wouldn't have a fold in the fabric either. So I mentioned earlier that I do actually mention on my website that there are crease marks in the vinyl and that there may be staple holes. You can barely notice them, but I do have to let everybody know that they are there. And most of the time, people, they don't worry about that. They're all excited about the fact that they're buying something that's a little bit more sustainable. It's been rescued or saved from going to landfill, because these fabric pieces would have gone to the tip had I not been able to get a hold of them. So I don't charge for fabric, and a lot of people think I'm wrong in doing that. look, it's your choice. If you get fabric for free and you want to charge for it, that's fine. You go ahead and do that. I recover my costs in my labour charge. So one of these days I will do a video explaining how I've worked out my labour rate for everything that I charge out in the store and for my handmade products. Let me know if you want that sooner rather than later. But it has been on my mind for probably about 18 months or so. So I don't charge for the fabric. My labour rate, now that varies. Ideally, I would like to get $60 an hour for everything that I do. For my alteration service, I do charge $60 an hour because I'm more than happy not to have the job that the customer gives me. So it kind of weeds out the jobs that I don't really want to have to do. So, but my minimum charge is $45 an hour. It's what I've been charging for nearly everything that I do for a few years now. And that takes into account thread, needles, power, my website fees, my sewing machines and any maintenance I might need, insurances, taxes. There's lots of other things involved in that as well. Even my mobile phone, you know, I have that expense every year or every month. All of those expenses that I have are factored into my labour rate. So at a minimum, I want $45 an hour. At a maximum, well, there'd be no maximum, but ideally I'd like $60 an hour. Usually when I make these bags, I have an idea in mind of what I'd like to get for the bags when I finish them. I've made a few of these, so I kind of know what they're going to look like before they're finished. I forgot to mention, the reason I had to take a photo of the sides is because in this bag, you can see the side seams don't match up. And that's because I forgot to, when I was cutting the fabric, I forgot to make sure that the fabric was cut in half at the same size as the vinyl. If I had done that, I would have had the seams matching up on the sides. And that's what my original bags were. So I'm a little disappointed that I forgot to take that into account. I'm blaming chemo brain. I'm blaming that for every mistake that I make at these days. So they're still fine. It's just something that I do want people to be aware of when they're looking at the photos on the website and even in the shop. I mean, in the shop it's easier. They can pick them up and see. Most people don't even take that into consideration though. So if I'm charging myself out at $60 an hour, that is $380 worth of my time for the 6 hours and 20 minutes that I spent. And I divide that by the 12 bags that I've made. Oh, I don't do that. I add the $16.80 in the expenses that I'm charging out, the labels, the zips, the pulls and the zipper tape. So there's $16.80 worth of material that I'm charging out, $380 of labour, which is $396.80. So if I divide that by 12, that makes it $33 per bag. I don't think these bags are worth that much. Also, mostly because I didn't get this seam matched up on the side. But in my mind, I had already decided I was going to sell these for $25 each. So if I go back to my $45 an hour labour rate, that works out to be $285 plus the $16.80 for material. That is $301.80. And that works out to be about $25 per bag. So that's what I'm going to base these on today, my $45 an hour labour rate plus the $16.80, and I'm going to sell them at $25 each. Now that's $25 Australian as well, not US or anything like that. So I hope I haven't bored you too much with this video. This one here as well will also be $25. I managed to get everything up on my website yesterday. I did finish these a couple of weeks ago, so I have been a little bit slack. It's just that these days my brain's not functioning as easily as it was a couple of months ago. So it's taking me a little bit longer to edit these videos. I had about 6 hours of video footage to edit down to what I think might be about 25 to 30 minutes by the time I finished editing this part of the video. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.